Welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Hugo Gurdon, Editor-in-Chief of the Washington Examiner. Thank you very much for joining us on washingtonexaminer.com. I'm joined today by Byron York, as usual, our chief political correspondent, who is down in Palm Beach. And it's the morning after President Trump's re-election victory.
This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends on this incredible movement.
We'll get to the ramifications of that and all the implications that we can in the time that we have, Byron. But first of all, because you were there, talk to us a little bit about the atmosphere at campaign headquarters when the crowd knew they were going to win, when it became jubilant, if it became jubilant. What was it like?
Well, it certainly did become jubilant. Trump had a number of events going on Election Day. He had a private members-only event at Mar-a-Lago, his club on Palm Beach. And then he had a much larger event for donors and supporters at the West Palm Beach Convention Center, which it was a huge room, just really cavernous room. And so everybody started trickling in about 6:30, 7 o'clock. And you could tell in the first few hours that a lot of them were actually quite apprehensive. They were worried that somehow Trump might not win. They heard good news from Georgia, and then they heard good news from North Carolina. They worried about Pennsylvania in particular, because I think they were kind of traumatized by the experience of the 2020 election, when a lot of them went to bed feeling that Trump had won re-election, that he had won specifically Pennsylvania. Then they wake up and they find out that Democrats are, locating more and more votes that will eventually lead to a Joe Biden win several days later. So they worried that that was going to happen again. So even as the good news began to come in from Pennsylvania, they worried that there was these wily Democrats were going to do something to change the situation there. When that became clear that it probably wasn't going to happen, there was a massive mood swing in the building, and people became really, really happy. They stayed that way all the way until Donald Trump himself came and addressed the crowd, which must have been about 2 o'clock. But by that time, Fox News had called the election, not just Pennsylvania, but the whole election, for Donald Trump, and they were literally dancing and singing.
Thank you very much. Wow. Well, I want to thank you all very much. Frankly, this was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. There's never been anything like this in this country, and maybe beyond.
It was an extraordinary evening in that a lot of us had thought that we might be waiting for not just hours or even days, but even weeks for Pennsylvania to go through not just its count, but all sorts of legal shenanigans. And yet, from the moment that the polls closed and news started trickling in from different parts of the country, different polling places, every single bit of that news, whether it was a reduction or slight underperforming by Kamala Harris in the places where she was nevertheless winning, big urban centers, or an outperformance by Donald Trump in other areas, it was all good news for Trump. So to some extent, it was not an evening filled with drama. There was no switchbacks. It was a steady progress towards what eventually became an absolutely crushing defeat. It was quite unexpected what we had, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't like a race in which the two leaders exchanged the lead back and forth several times in the course of the race. That didn't really happen. I will say that early on in the evening, some of the people in the crowd were reading tweets and other reports from Pennsylvania of really, really good turnout for Kamala Harris in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. And they thought that was a big deal and a bad omen for the Trump campaign. turns out that was a lot of spin. I mean, they really weren't accurate. And what you said is correct. Once the real numbers started coming in, they looked good. And the biggest thing was that everybody was doing was comparing Harris's performance to Biden's performance in 2020 and comparing Trump's performance to his own performance 4 years earlier as well. Right. And basically what they found was Trump outperforming what he had done in 2020 and Harris underperforming what Biden had done in 2020. And even when in counties and where Harris won the county, she didn't win it by as much as right. Joe Biden did. You add all those up, and she lost Pennsylvania.
Yeah, let's just stop for a second, to pause for a moment, just to consider the scale of what has just happened. President Trump has been the nominee for 3 presidential cycles. He won the first, he lost the second. He came back and he won the presidency for a second time after defeat. In the intervening 8 years since the previous victory, he's been indicted numerous times. I have lost count of exactly how many times. He's been impeached twice. He's been besieged by the bien-pensants and the deep state. This is one of the political comebacks, the greatest political comebacks in American political history, is it not?
Yeah, and don't forget being shot in one assassination attempt and targeted in another.
Right.
Right. So it's absolutely incredible, and I just don't think you can overstate what a big deal this is. First of all, only once in American history, in 1892, I think, has a former president come back, been out of office for a term, then come back to win his office. And that was not with the drama that surrounded Donald Trump. So I do think that by any measure, this was the most extraordinary political comeback in U.S. history for all the reasons that you mentioned. And I have to say the sense of just crushing disappointment among Democrats who had really convinced themselves, I think, that Harris was going to win. They believed that she had closed very strong, and they believed that Trump had made a series of gaps and errors, really kind of starting with the Madison Square Garden rally on, I think it was October the 27th.
There's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
And then going on to one time where he apparently said that he was going to protect women, whether they liked it or not. And then this whole fight he had with Liz Cheney over this cookie, putting her in front of a firing squad idea.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
Which she didn't say. No. So the Democrats were very encouraged by that. They thought that Harris had performed kind of flawlessly during these last few weeks, and that Trump had just shot himself in the foot repeatedly, and that whatever advantage Trump had, which they conceded he had in early and mid-November, she had made up at the end of the campaign. And I think they were absolutely stunned by the fact that she wasn't really even close.
Right. And yet, it's likely that when all of the votes have been counted and the states and everything has been tallied, Donald Trump will have won 30 of the 50 states, just as he did in 2016. The Democrats will have won 20 plus the District of Columbia, I believe, is where it's going. But the big difference between 2016 and this time is that Donald Trump appears to have won the popular vote by 5 million votes. And I think that this is enormously significant and has all sorts of ramifications. But what's your impression of how much difference that makes?
It makes a huge difference, at least to the perceptions of legitimacy of a president. Now, there's simply no doubt that the constitutional way to be elected president, and the only way, is to win the Electoral College. That's just the way it is. Still, it is a bad idea for a president to have won bad thing for a president to have won the Electoral College and lost the popular vote. It's most of the time that's not a problem. The president wins both, but we have had some situations, George W. Bush in the year 2000 and then Donald Trump again in 2016, in which that happened, and it does leave them open to questions from the opposition about their legitimacy. This is, I think, a structural problem that we will probably see more of in the future, in part because California, the giant state, has moved further and further to the left, whereas Democratic candidates will just pile up millions of votes in California, even though they can only get California's 54 electoral votes out of it. So that's a problem for the future. In this case, I do think one of the accusations against Trump of his, quote, illegitimacy was the fact that he didn't win the popular vote, and now he's won both.
What that's going to do, it seems to me, is enable him, and I'm sure he will be keen to say this, he will allow him to say, whenever there is anyone quibbling about his agenda or his leadership, he'll say, I won. This is democracy. Get over it. No one can say to him now, you didn't win the people. And therefore, he can claim much more of a mandate for the things that he is going to attempt to do. So one of the things that struck me when he came out to give his victory speech was a certain kind of sobriety, by which, or slightly low key, though it wasn't razzmatazz. It seemed to me he walked to the podium and he put down a binder, it looked like, with the remarks that he was going to make in it, and that there was a sense of purpose about it. And I've seen reported this morning that the people around him are now talking very much and in a sort of an efficient way, or a would-be efficient way, about transition. And there seems to be a decision that they're not going to be flat-footed the way that they were in 2016. We're not going to have weeks and even months when people are going to be saying, when are you going to actually nominate or appoint someone to run this part of the government? There's am I right in seeing a real sense of purpose now and efficiency or determination to be efficient that we didn't see the first time round?
So far, I do think some of the sense of sobriety, and by the way, Trump is always sober because he's a teetotaler, but some of that could have been fatigue. You know, he packed 4 rallies into Monday. I think he did North Carolina, 2 in Pennsylvania, and finished up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I believe the plane landed in Palm Beach about 5:40 in the morning on Tuesday morning. So he works all day and goes through, and then midnight comes, and then 2 o'clock Wednesday morning is when he delivers his remarks, saying he's a 78-year-old man. So I think he's a little tired for part of that. But the more serious thing you were proposing, which is Trump going to do a better job on his transition? In 2016, he had put Chris Christie in charge of planning his transition, and Christie had done a creditable job with doing it. Then Trump just threw everything out at the last minute. Bad idea. This time, I think you and I have remarked before, Trump is really quite superstitious. He doesn't like the idea of planning his transition before he's actually won the election. And he didn't like it in this sense anyway. And in addition, this whole Project 2025 thing that Democrats really kind of based the first part of their campaign against him on, which is allegedly some plan for fascism dreamed up by the Heritage Foundation that was going to be Trump's model and is going to turn everybody into the Handmaid's Tale or something like that. Trump renounced it. And it's always been my belief that if Trump did win, at some point he was going to say, that Project 2025 is in the drawer over there. Let's get it out and start working with it. So I imagine he would probably do that. But a transition is a huge, huge job of organization and judgment that will really take all of his attention for the next few months.
Well, that's where we'll leave it, Byron, for this week. We'll be back again next week, and no doubt the transition discussions will have gone that much further, and we'll even have all of the results in. The result is not in doubt, but there are still some numbers to come in. Byron, thanks very much for joining us again this week. Thank you to everybody else for coming to thewashingtonexaminer.com. You can see more of our writing and our videos on washingtonexaminer.com. I hope you come back repeatedly and enjoy the Washington Examiner. Thanks very much.